A little girl was pulled into a van, and in that single moment, everything changed forever. Her friends watched helplessly as she disappeared, leaving behind a community drowning in fear and uncertainty. What happened next would trigger a desperate chase, a heroic police dog racing against time, and a shocking discovery that would expose a sinister darkness lurking in their own backyard. This is a story of courage, desperation, and a truth so horrifying it would shake an entire neighborhood to its core. Stay with us as we uncover what really happened that day. The sun hung high over Maple Street, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was one of those perfect afternoons in late spring, the kind where the world feels at peace, where nothing bad could possibly happen. Children's laughter echoed from yards and playgrounds, that innocent, carefree sound that made parents feel their world was safe, that their children were protected. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Dogs barked playfully in backyards. It was the kind of day that seemed to promise safety, normalcy, and the simple joys of childhood. 8-year-old Mia lived in a small house with white shutters at the end of the block, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a postcard about American suburbia. She had lived there her entire life, and to her, it was the center of the universe. She was the kind of kid whom every parent dreams of, curious, intelligent, kind-hearted, and full of life. She loved reading books under the oak tree in her backyard, drawing pictures of butterflies and rainbows, and playing with her friends until the streetlights came on. Her mother, Sarah, was a devoted parent who knew every detail of Mia's world. Her favorite foods, her best friends, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday. That afternoon, like any other day, Mia asked her mom if she could play outside with her friends. Sarah was folding laundry in the living room, half watching a daytime talk show. She glanced at the clock, 3:30 p.m. It was still early, still light outside. The neighborhood was full of people. What could possibly go wrong? Sarah smiled and said yes, a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A moment she would replay in her mind 1,000 times, wondering if she could have done anything differently. Mia skipped outside, her pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her blonde pigtails swinging as she moved. She was completely unaware that her world was about to shatter in ways no child should ever experience. That innocence was about to be stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. Outside, Mia joined her friends, Tommy, Jessica, and Lucas, who were playing hopscotch on the sidewalk in front of the Henderson house. They had drawn the squares in chalk just that morning, and they were having the time of their lives, their voices filled with joy and competition. Mia was winning, of course. She was always good at hopscotch. The 4 children were so absorbed in their game that they didn't notice the world around them changing. At 3:47 p.m., a white van with tinted windows slowly turned onto Maple Street. It wasn't from the neighborhood. Nobody recognized it. The van was old, its paint faded and dull, its windows so dark you couldn't see inside. It looked out of place on this peaceful street, like a stain on a white cloth. The van crawled past the children playing, its engine barely audible, like a predator stalking its prey through tall grass. Inside, a man watched with cold, calculating eyes. He had been planning this for weeks, studying the neighborhood, learning the routines, identifying the vulnerable targets, waiting for the perfect moment when the stars aligned and opportunity presented itself. He had driven past this street dozens of times, watching, waiting, learning. And now, as he watched Mia play hopscotch with her friends, her golden hair catching the afternoon sunlight, he knew this was it. This was the moment that he had been waiting for. He pulled the van to the curb, just 50 feet away from where the children played, His heart raced with sick anticipation, a twisted excitement that made his hands shake slightly. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This had to be perfect. He rolled down the window slowly, quietly, so as not to draw attention. The window descended with a soft, mechanical sound. His eyes never left Mia. He called out to her with a voice dripping with false kindness, the kind of voice that sounded like it belonged to a friendly uncle or a concerned neighbor. "Hey, little girl. I'm looking for a lost puppy. Have you seen one around here? A little golden retriever? His name is Max, and he ran away from my house this morning. I'm so worried about him." He paused, letting the story sink in, making it sound real, making it sound like something a desperate pet owner would say. "I have some candy in my van if you want to help me look. I could really use your help. You look like a smart, kind girl who might be good at finding things." Mia, innocent and trusting, looked at her friends. They shrugged. It seemed like a harmless request. Nobody had ever told them to be afraid of strangers in this neighborhood. It was supposed to be safe. Tommy said, "Go ahead, Mia. Maybe you can help find the puppy?" Mia smiled and walked toward the van, her small feet carrying her closer to a nightmare she couldn't comprehend. The man leaned out the window, his smile predatory, his eyes cold and empty despite the warmth in his voice. He looked like a normal person, middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of man you would pass on the street without a second glance. That was what made him so dangerous. Mia was now just a few feet away from the van. She could see inside slightly, could see the dark interior, could smell something unfamiliar coming from within. Something in her gut told her to stop, to turn around, to go back to her friends. But she ignored that instinct, that voice inside her that was trying to protect her. She was 8 years old. She didn't know how to listen to that voice yet. The man reached out his hand toward her, his fingers curling in a beckoning gesture. "Come here, sweetheart. I want to show you something. I have pictures of Max on my phone. Maybe you've seen him around the neighborhood." His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who had done this before. And then, in a fraction of a second, everything went wrong. His hand shot out, grabbing Mia's wrist with a grip like steel, with a strength that was impossible for a small child to resist. She screamed, a piercing, desperate cry that would echo in her friend's nightmares for years to come. The sound was primal, filled with terror and confusion, and the sudden realization that something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. "Help! Help me!" Mia cried out, her voice cracking with fear. She tried to pull away, her small body struggling against the man's iron grip. But before any of her friends could react, before any adult could intervene, the van door swung open with a violent motion, and Mia was yanked inside. Her pink backpack fell to the ground, abandoned on the sidewalk. For a moment, it sat there, a symbol of the childhood that had just been stolen. Her friends stood frozen, their voices caught in their throats, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. By the time they found their voices and screamed for help, the van was already speeding down the street, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving nothing but exhaust, the smell of burning rubber, and terror in its wake. Within seconds, the entire neighborhood erupted into chaos. Parents came running from their houses, their faces twisted with horror and disbelief. They had heard the screams. They had seen the van. But they were too late. Sarah heard the screams and ran outside, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked down the street and saw the white van disappearing around the corner, saw her daughter's pink backpack lying on the sidewalk. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. the world seemed to slow down, to become surreal and dreamlike. Then the realization hit her like a physical blow. Mia was gone. Her daughter, her precious daughter, had been taken. The safe suburban neighborhood that had felt like a fortress, that had promised protection and security, suddenly felt like a prison. And the danger wasn't outside the walls. It was already inside, already here, already claiming victims. Sarah's scream was different from the others. It was a mother's scream, a sound of pure anguish and despair that would haunt the neighborhood forever. She collapsed to her knees on the sidewalk, unable to stand, unable to breathe. Neighbors rushed to their phones, calling 911 with shaking voices, their words tumbling over each other in panic and confusion. "A child has been taken. A white van. It went that way. Please, you have to hurry." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, a sound that promised help but also confirmed the nightmare was real. Within minutes, police cars were racing down Maple Street, their lights flashing red and blue, painting the neighborhood in colors of emergency and crisis. But with every second that passed, Mia was getting farther away, and the window of opportunity to find her was closing. The first critical hours of a missing child case are the most important, and those hours were slipping away like sand through fingers. What the community didn't know was that this moment, this terrifying abduction, was about to trigger a series of events that would expose a darkness far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. A darkness that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. Detective Marcus Webb had been on the police force for 23 years. And in all that time, he had learned that the first hours of a missing child case were the difference between life and death. He had studied the statistics, attended countless seminars on child abduction recovery, and had personally worked on 17 missing children cases throughout his career. 13 of those cases had ended in tragedy. 4 had ended in miraculous reunions. The odds were not in Mia's favor, and Marcus knew it. Every second that passed was a second closer to the point of no return, the moment when hope transformed into despair and recovery became identification. He arrived at Maple Street within 10 minutes of the first 911 call, his unmarked sedan pulling up to the curb where Sarah was still on her knees, surrounded by neighbors and uniformed officers trying to comfort her. The late afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the street that seemed to stretch like dark fingers reaching out to claim the neighborhood. Sarah's body was racked with sobs, her entire frame shaking as if she might collapse completely. Her husband, James, had been called at work and was on his way. But he wasn't here yet. Right now, Sarah was alone in her worst nightmare, and no amount of comfort from well-meaning neighbors could change that. Marcus was a tall man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair that had turned more gray than black over the years, and eyes that had seen too much darkness to ever truly recover their innocence. He had solved countless cases throughout his career: murders, assaults, thefts, fraud. But child abductions always hit differently. They always stayed with you, haunting your dreams, making you question your own parenting choices, reminding you that the world was far more dangerous than most people wanted to admit. Marcus had a daughter of his own, now grown and living on the West Coast. But he still remembered what it felt like to be a parent. To entrust your child to the world and hope that the world would treat them with kindness. He stepped out of his car and immediately took in the scene with the trained eye of someone who had spent more than 2 decades analyzing crime scenes. The pink backpack lying on the sidewalk, one strap still extended as if Mia had been torn away from it mid-stride. The chalk hopscotch squares, the numbers still visible, a testament to childhood games that had been interrupted by nightmare. the terrified faces of the neighborhood children who had witnessed the abduction, their eyes wide with shock and confusion, their innocence shattered by what they had seen. The frantic parents gathering in small clusters, their voices rising in panic and disbelief, some crying, some angry, all of them grappling with the sudden realization that the safe suburban cocoon they had wrapped around their families was far more fragile than they had believed. This was a community in shock, a neighborhood that had believed itself to be safe, now confronted with the brutal reality that nowhere was truly safe. That danger could arrive in a white van on a sunny afternoon and steal away everything that mattered. "I'm Detective Marcus Webb," he said, approaching Sarah with measured steps, his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to find your daughter, but I need you to tell me everything you know. What's her name? What was she wearing? How long has she been missing? Does she have any medical conditions I should know about? Has she ever run away before? Does she know to be cautious around strangers?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her face a mask of anguish that seemed to age her 10 years in a single afternoon. "Mia. Her name is Mia. She's 8 years old. She was wearing a pink t-shirt with a butterfly on it, her favorite shirt, and blue jeans. She has blonde hair, pigtails tied with pink ribbons. Sarah's voice broke, and she had to pause to compose herself. "She's so small. She's so innocent. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She loves animals and reading books and drawing pictures. She's never done anything to deserve this. Please, you have to find her. You have to bring her home. I can't live without her. She's my whole world." Marcus knelt down beside Sarah, his knees creaking slightly with age and the accumulated wear of a career spent chasing criminals and seeking justice. "We will do everything in our power to find her. I promise you that. But I need you to be strong right now. I need you to help me. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand, her body still trembling with shock and fear. Marcus turned to the uniformed officers who were standing nearby, waiting for direction. His voice became sharp and commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I want every available unit searching for that white van. Get a description out to all surrounding precincts immediately. Check every traffic camera on all major roads leading out of this neighborhood. I want to know where that van went, and I want to know now. Set up roadblocks on Highway 7 and Highway 12. If he's trying to get out of the city, those are his most likely routes. Get the description to the state police as well. This is now a multi-jurisdictional investigation." Within minutes, the police response had escalated dramatically. What had started as a neighborhood incident was rapidly transforming into a full-scale emergency operation. Officers were canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking residents if they had seen the white van, if they had noticed anything unusual, if they had any information that might help locate the missing child. Traffic cameras across the city were being reviewed by officers in the communications center, their eyes scanning footage frame by frame, looking for a white van with tinted windows. Dispatch was broadcasting descriptions of the van and Mia to every officer in the city, every precinct, every patrol car. The neighborhood had become a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow police tape, filled with the sounds of sirens and the organized chaos of a full-scale investigation. News vans were beginning to arrive, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky, their reporters preparing their stories about the abduction that would dominate the evening news. Detective Webb interviewed the 3 children who had witnessed the abduction. Tommy Chen, age 9, Jessica Martinez, age 8, and Lucas Thompson, age 10. They were traumatized, their voices small and frightened as they described what they had seen, their words tumbling over each other in a confused rush. They had been playing hopscotch, they explained, when the white van had pulled up to the curb. They hadn't thought anything of it at first. Adults were always driving through the neighborhood. But then the man had called out to Mia, and something about his voice had seemed wrong. Tommy described the man as scary-looking and mean, though he struggled to articulate exactly why he had felt that way. Jessica said he had a weird voice, like he was pretending to be nice, like when my dad pretends to like my mom's cooking, but he doesn't really. Lucas, the oldest of the three, had been more observant. He remembered that the van had a dent on the passenger side, that the paint was faded and old, and that the license plate started with a 7 and had what looked like a B or D as the second character. These small details, these fragments of memory preserved in the minds of frightened children, would become crucial pieces of the puzzle. As the afternoon turned to evening and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed almost obscene in their beauty, the police department set up a command center in the Maple Street Community Center. Maps of the city were pinned to the walls, their surfaces already marked with notes and circles indicating areas that had been searched or needed to be searched. Photographs of Mia were printed in large quantities and distributed to every officer, every precinct, every patrol car. Her innocent smile stared out from the photographs, a smile that had been captured at her school picture day just 3 months earlier. A hotline was established for tips and sightings, with a team of officers standing by to answer calls and record information. The media was notified, and within hours, Mia's face was on every local news station, her innocent smile staring out from television screens across the city, her photograph appearing on the internet, on social media, on the screens of thousands of people who had never met her, but who would now become invested in her fate. Missing child alert. 8-year-old Mia Torres abducted from Maple Street neighborhood. Caucasian female, blonde hair, blue eyes, approximately 4 feet tall, weighing 70 pounds. Last seen wearing a pink butterfly t-shirt and blue jeans. If you have any information regarding this child or the white van involved in her abduction, please call the tip line immediately at 555-0147. All calls will be kept confidential. The tip line began ringing almost immediately. Some calls were legitimate. People who had seen white vans in various parts of the city, who had noticed suspicious activity, who wanted to help. But many were false leads, hoaxes, or the rambling of people seeking attention. Each call had to be investigated, each lead had to be followed up on, consuming resources and time that could have been spent on more productive avenues of investigation. This was the frustrating reality of missing child cases. The public wanted to help, but not all help was useful, and sorting through the noise to find the signal was exhausting work. But as the evening wore on and darkness fell over the city like a heavy blanket, there were no credible leads. The white van had seemingly vanished into thin air, as if it had never existed at all. The man who had taken Mia had planned this carefully, had thought through every detail, had covered his tracks with the precision of someone who had done this before, or at least someone who had spent considerable time planning this specific abduction. Detective Webb sat in the command center, staring at Mia's photograph, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Somewhere out there, a little girl was in the hands of a predator, and he had no idea where she was or what was being done to her. The thought made his stomach churn with a sickening mixture of dread and determination. At 9:47 p.m., just 6 hours after Mia's abduction, Detective Webb received a call that would change everything. It was Officer Daniel Chen, a K-9 unit officer who worked with his partner, a German shepherd named Shadow. Shadow was one of the best search and rescue dogs in the department, with an uncanny ability to track scents that had gone cold, to find what others had given up looking for. Shadow had been involved in the recovery of 7 missing persons over his 5-year career with the police department, and his success rate was legendary among law enforcement circles. "Detective, we've got something," Officer Chen said, his voice tight with urgency and barely contained excitement. Shadow picked up a scent near the edge of the neighborhood, about 2 blocks from where the abduction occurred. "The scent is fresh, it's definitely from today. Shadow is tracking it, and it's heading toward the old industrial district. We're following it now, moving slowly to make sure we don't lose the trail." The old industrial district was on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling maze of abandoned warehouses, closed factories, and storage facilities that had been left to decay over decades as manufacturing had moved overseas and the local economy had shifted. The district was a graveyard of American industry, filled with crumbling brick buildings with broken windows, rusted machinery left behind when the factories had shut down, and overgrown lots where weeds had reclaimed the asphalt. It was the kind of place where someone could hide, where screams wouldn't be heard by anyone who cared to help, where a child could disappear into the darkness and never be found. It was the kind of place that made Detective Webb's blood run cold, that made him think of all the terrible things that could happen in such an isolated location. "Stay with it," Marcus commanded, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I'm on my way. And Chen, be careful. If this lead is good, we're dealing with someone who has already proven they're willing to take extreme measures. Don't approach the suspect alone. Wait for backup. I repeat, wait for backup before you engage." Detective Webb hung up the phone and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. He was moving toward the door when he heard a commotion in the command center. One of the officers, a young woman named Officer Sarah Kim, was holding up a piece of paper, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. "Detective, we just received an anonymous email. It came to the department's tip line email address. It's from the abductor. He sent us a message. You need to read this." Marcus's heart stopped. The command center fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. He took the paper from Officer Kim's hands and read the words that had been printed out in a standard computer font. "Detective Webb, you don't know me, but I know you. I've been watching this city for a long time, watching the police department, watching the people who think they're safe behind their white picket fences and their locked doors. Mia is safe with me. For now. But if you want to see her alive again, you need to understand something. This isn't about the girl. This is about something much bigger. Something that your department has been covering up for years. Something that goes all the way to the top. If you want Mia back, you're going to have to dig deeper than you've ever dug before. You're going to have to uncover the truth that everyone in this city wants to keep buried. You're going to have to face the corruption that has festered in your own department like a cancer. The clock is ticking, Detective. Mia has maybe 48 hours. Use that time wisely. Find the truth, and you'll find the girl. The message was unsigned, but it was clear. This abduction wasn't random. It wasn't the act of a simple predator looking for a victim to satisfy his twisted desires. This was calculated, deliberate, a message wrapped in a crime. The abductor knew Detective Webb. He knew the police department. He knew about corruption within the ranks. And he was sending a message that suggested there was something darker lurking beneath the surface of their community. Something that had been hidden. Something that someone wanted to keep hidden. Something that was worth abducting a child to expose. Detective Webb looked at the message again, his mind racing through the possibilities. What truth? What cover-up? What darkness had he missed? What corruption was the abductor referring to? In his 23 years on the force, Marcus had heard rumors, whispers about officers who had crossed the line, about investigations that had been quashed, about evidence that had disappeared. But nothing concrete. Nothing he could prove. Was this what the abductor was referring to? Officer Chen's voice crackled through the radio, pulling Marcus back to the present moment. Detective, Shadow's scent trail is getting stronger. We're heading toward the old Riverside manufacturing plant on the edge of the industrial district. It's been abandoned for about 15 years, but there's fresh evidence of activity here. Someone's been here recently. We can see fresh tire tracks in the dirt, and the chain on the front gate has been cut. We're going to approach carefully. But I think we've found something. Marcus looked at the email again, then at Mia's photograph on the wall. That innocent smile, those trusting eyes. Somewhere in this city, a little girl was being held captive by someone who claimed to have a purpose, a message, a reason for taking her. And somewhere in the darkness of the past, in the hidden files and buried secrets of the police department, there was a truth waiting to be uncovered. A truth that might be the only thing standing between Mia and her death. A truth that someone had been willing to commit a heinous crime to expose. I'm on my way to Riverside Manufacturing, Marcus said into his radio. All units converge on that location. And somebody get me the cold case files from the last 10 years. If there's corruption in this department, if there's something we've been covering up, I want to know about it. Mia's life might depend on it. The real investigation was about to begin, and it was going to take Detective Webb down a path he had never expected to travel, into the darkest corners of his own department, into secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. Detective Webb arrived at the Riverside manufacturing plant at 10:34 p.m., his unmarked sedan pulling up to the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the sprawling complex. The plant was a monument to industrial decay, a massive brick structure that stretched at least 300 feet across, with rows of broken windows like empty eye sockets staring out into the darkness. The building loomed against the night sky, silhouetted against the distant glow of the city lights, looking less like a place of work and more like a tomb. Vines and ivy had begun to reclaim the walls, creeping up the brick like nature was slowly consuming the structure, trying to arouse the evidence of human ambition and industrial progress. The parking lot was cracked and broken, weeds pushing through the asphalt in defiant patches of green. Scattered across the lot were the remnants of the past. Old machinery, discarded pallets, rusted metal drums that had once contained chemicals whose names had been lost to time. Officer Chen was waiting for him at the gate, his German shepherd partner Shadow sitting alertly beside him. The dog's ears perked up, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Shadow was a beautiful animal, muscular and lean, with the bearing of a soldier. The dog had been through extensive training, had learned to detect human scent with an accuracy that exceeded most human senses, and had proven his worth time and again in search and rescue operations. The scent trail leads directly to the east entrance, Officer Chen reported, pointing toward a side entrance to the building where the door hung partially open, its hinges rusted and creaking slightly in the cool night breeze. Shadow picked it up about 2 blocks from the abduction site and tracked it straight here. The trail is fresh, less than 6 hours old. Someone has definitely been here recently. Look at the tire tracks. Marcus examined the tire tracks in the dirt, the treads clearly visible in the beam of his flashlight. They matched the description of the tires that would be on a white van. Mid-sized, common, the kind that wouldn't stand out. But the pattern of the tracks told him something important. The van had pulled up to the east entrance, had stopped there for several minutes. He could tell by the way the tires had sunk deeper into the dirt, as if the vehicle had been stationary, and then had continued around to the back of the building. "Has anyone gone inside?" Marcus asked, his hand instinctively moving to the service weapon at his hip. "No, sir. I waited for you and for backup before proceeding. We have units converging on this location from all directions. We should have at least 8 officers here within the next 5 minutes. Marcus nodded, appreciating Chen's caution. This was a dangerous situation. If the abductor was inside the building, if Mia was inside, they needed to approach carefully. A wrong move could result in the death of the child they were trying to save. But they also needed to move quickly. Every minute that passed was a minute that the abductor could be using to harm Mia, to move her to another location, to cover his tracks. "All right," Marcus said. "We wait for backup, but we keep the building under surveillance. If anyone tries to leave, we stop them. And Chen, keep Shadow ready. If we need to search the building, we'll use him to locate Mia." Within 5 minutes, police cars began arriving at the scene, their lights off to avoid alerting anyone inside the building. Officers fanned out around the perimeter, establishing a cordon that would prevent anyone from escaping. The building was now surrounded, boxed in, a trap that the abductor wouldn't be able to escape from if he was indeed inside. Marcus stood at the gate, staring at the open door, his mind working through the possibilities. The email had mentioned corruption in the police department, secrets that someone wanted exposed. But what secrets? What corruption? As he stood there, his radio crackled to life with a message from the command center. "Detective Webb, we've been reviewing the cold case files as you requested. There's something you need to know. There are several cases from the last 10 years that have some irregularities. Cases that were closed quickly without thorough investigation. Cases where evidence seems to have gone missing. And there's a name that appears in connection with several of these cases. Captain Robert Harrington. He was the commanding officer of the Major Crimes Division during that period." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Captain Robert Harrington? He knew Harrington, had worked with him on several cases over the years. Harrington was one of the most respected officers in the department, a man who had risen through the ranks, who had commendations and awards, who was considered a model of law enforcement excellence. If Harrington was involved in corruption, if Harrington was covering something up, then the problem went deeper than Marcus had imagined. "Send me the details on those cases," Marcus said into his radio. "And find out where Captain Harrington is right now. I want to know his location and his movements for the past 6 hours." "Already on it, Detective." Harrington clocked out at 5:47 p.m. He told the desk sergeant he was heading home. But his home phone isn't answering, and his wife says she hasn't seen him since this morning. Marcus felt the pieces beginning to fall into place, a pattern emerging from the chaos. Captain Harrington was missing. Captain Harrington had connections to cold cases with irregularities. Captain Harrington might be the one who had taken Mia, who had sent the email, who was trying to expose something that he himself had been involved in covering up. But why? What had changed? Why now? Why Mia? "All units, be advised," Marcus transmitted. "We're looking for Captain Robert Harrington in connection with this investigation. He's a white male, age 56, 6 feet 2 inches tall, approximately 220 pounds. He's armed and should be considered extremely dangerous. If you locate him, do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. Call it in immediately." The radio crackled with acknowledgments from officers throughout the city. The hunt for Captain Harrington had begun. Marcus turned back to the Riverside manufacturing plant, his attention returning to the immediate situation. Backup was in place. The building was surrounded. It was time to move in. "All right," he said to Officer Chen. "Let's go find Mia." They approached the east entrance cautiously, their weapons drawn, their senses heightened. The door hung open, and beyond it lay darkness. The kind of darkness that seemed almost alive, that seemed to hide secrets and dangers. Marcus could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere inside the building, a rhythmic sound that echoed through the empty structure. He could smell the mustiness of a building that had been abandoned for years, mixed with something else. Something chemical. Something that made his eyes water slightly. Officer Chen held Shadow's leash tightly. "Shadow, search," he commanded. And the dog immediately put his nose to the ground, his body tensing as he caught the scent he had been tracking. The dog moved forward, pulling slightly on the leash, his eyes focused, his entire being concentrated on following the scent trail. They entered the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the cavernous interior of what had once been a manufacturing floor. Massive machines, now covered in rust and dust, stood like silent sentinels throughout the space. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, scattered papers, old machinery parts, the detritus of an abandoned workplace. Shadows danced across the walls as their flashlights moved, creating the illusion of movement, of something watching them from the darkness. Shadow led them deeper into the building, toward the back, toward what had once been the administrative section. The dog's pace quickened, his breathing becoming more rapid, his body language indicating that he had found something significant. They climbed a set of stairs, the metal groaning under their weight, and emerged into a hallway lined with offices. Small rooms with desks and filing cabinets, the remnants of the bureaucracy that had once run the factory. Shadow stopped at one of the offices, a door marked "Plant Manager" in faded letters. The dog sat down, his signal that he had found what he was looking for. Officer Chen's hand went to his weapon. Marcus pushed the door open slowly, his gun raised, his heart pounding in his chest. The office was empty, but it wasn't empty in the way that the rest of the building was empty. This office had been used recently. There was a chair in the middle of the room, and on the floor beside it were restraints. Zip ties, rope, and something that looked disturbingly like duct tape. There was a sleeping bag in the corner, and on a makeshift table there were supplies, bottled water, canned food, a flashlight. And on the wall, there was something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Photographs. Dozens of photographs pinned to the wall with thumbtacks, creating a macabre collage of images. Marcus moved closer to examine the photographs, his flashlight illuminating the disturbing display. The photographs showed children, dozens of children, all appearing to be between the ages of 6 and 12. Some of the photographs were old, dating back years, their colors faded and grainy. Others were more recent, their colors vivid and clear. And among the recent photographs, there was one that made Marcus's heart stop. A photograph of Mia, taken just hours earlier, showing her sitting in the chair in this very room, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with terror. "She's here," Marcus said, his voice tight. "She's somewhere in this building. Chen, get back up in here now, and get a medical team standing by. We're going to find her." But even as he spoke those words, Marcus was studying the wall of photographs, his detective's mind working to understand what he was seeing. These weren't random photographs. They were organized, cataloged, documented. This was the work of someone who had been collecting these images over a long period of time. This was the work of someone who had taken multiple children, who had done something to them, who had kept records of his crimes. And then Marcus saw something that made him understand. Among the photographs on the wall, there were newspaper clippings, articles about missing children from years past, articles about cases that had been closed, cases that had been marked as runaways or accidents, cases that had been handled by the Major Crimes Division under the command of Captain Robert Harrington. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Captain Harrington wasn't just covering up crimes. Captain Harrington was the criminal. He had been abducting children for years, and he had been using his position in the police department to cover up his crimes, to make investigations disappear, to ensure that no one ever connected the dots. And now, for reasons that Marcus didn't yet understand, Harrington had decided to expose himself by taking Mia and sending that email. But why? What had changed? What had made Harrington decide to bring everything into the light? "Search the building," Marcus commanded into his radio. "Top to bottom, find Mia Torres, and find Captain Robert Harrington. He's our primary suspect in this abduction and possibly in multiple missing children cases dating back years." The radio exploded with activity as officers began searching the building, moving through its corridors and rooms, looking for any sign of the missing child or the rogue captain. Marcus stood in the plant manager's office, staring at the wall of photographs, at the evidence of years of crimes hidden in plain sight. And he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find the truth, no matter where it led him, no matter who it implicated, no matter what it cost. The real investigation had begun, and it was going to expose secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. The search of the Riverside manufacturing plant continued through the night. Officers moving methodically through every room, every corridor, every shadowed corner of the massive structure. But despite their efforts, despite the thoroughness of their search, there was no sign of Mia. The chair in the plant manager's office remained empty, a silent testament to her absence. The sleeping bag, the supplies, the wall of photographs, all of it suggested that someone had been here, had been keeping someone here. But the child they were searching for had vanished like a ghost. Marcus stood in the center of the plant manager's office at 11:47 p.m., studying the wall of photographs with growing horror and understanding. Officer Chen stood beside him, his face grim, his jaw clenched. Shadow lay on the floor, exhausted from the search, his tongue lolling out, his dark eyes watching the two men with an intelligence that seemed almost accusatory, as if the dog understood that they had failed in their mission to find the missing child. "We need to identify these children," Marcus said, his voice hollow with the weight of what he was seeing. "Every single one of them. We need to cross-reference them with missing children reports from the past 15 years. If Harrington has been taking children, if he's been keeping records, then we need to know how many victims there are, and we need to know what happened to them." Officer Chen pulled out his phone and began photographing the wall, capturing every image, every newspaper clipping, every piece of evidence. "This is going to take time, Detective. There are dozens of photographs here. Some of them are old, faded. It's going to be difficult to identify some of these children." "Then we'd better get started," Marcus said. "Because every hour that passes is an hour that Mia is in danger, and every hour that passes is an hour that Harrington is getting farther away." Marcus's radio crackled to life. It was the command center, and the voice on the other end sounded urgent, almost panicked. "Detective Webb, we've got a situation. We've been reviewing Captain Harrington's financial records as part of the investigation, and we've found something disturbing. Over the past 10 years, Harrington has made numerous cash withdrawals, totaling over $2 million. The withdrawals are irregular, but they seem to correlate with the dates of missing children cases. Additionally, we've found evidence that Harrington has been accessing files from closed cases, files that should have been sealed or archived. He's been systematically reviewing his own investigations, modifying reports, removing evidence. $2 million. The number hung in the air like a curse. What had Harrington been doing with that money? Who had he been paying? Was someone else involved in this conspiracy? Was the corruption deeper than just one rogue captain? Get me a complete financial audit of Harrington's accounts, Marcus commanded. I want to know every transaction, every wire transfer, every penny that's moved in or out of his accounts in the past 10 years. And cross-reference those transactions with other officers in the department. If Harrington was paying someone off, I want to know who. Already on it, sir. But there's something else. We've located Captain Harrington's vehicle, a white van registered to a shell company that Harrington owns. The van was spotted on a traffic camera heading north on Highway 7 approximately 90 minutes ago. We've issued an APB, and state police are setting up roadblocks. We're also tracking his cell phone signal, and it appears to be moving north, away from the city. Marcus felt frustration rising in his chest. Harrington was running. And he was running with knowledge of where Mia was, knowledge of what he had done to her, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death for the missing child. Every minute that passed was a minute that Harrington was putting distance between himself and the law. A minute that he could be harming Mia or disposing of evidence. Put out an all-points bulletin, Marcus said. I want every available unit converging on Highway 7. Harrington is armed and dangerous. He's taken a child, and he's fleeing the jurisdiction. Treat him as an extreme threat. If you have a shot, take it. I repeat, if you have a shot, take it. Marcus hung up the radio and turned to Officer Chen. We need to get back to the command center. We need to coordinate this manhunt. And we need to figure out where Harrington is taking Mia. They rushed out of the Riverside manufacturing plant and headed back to Marcus's car. As they drove through the empty streets of the city, heading toward the police headquarters where the command center was operating, Marcus's mind was working through the puzzle pieces, trying to understand the psychology of a man who had spent years committing heinous crimes and covering them up. Captain Robert Harrington had been a respected officer, a man with a sterling record, a man who had earned commendations and awards. What had driven him to abduct children? What psychological break had occurred that had transformed him from a law enforcement officer into a predator? And more importantly, what had changed recently that had caused him to expose himself by taking Mia? Marcus arrived at the command center at 12:23 a.m., and the scene that greeted him was one of controlled chaos. Officers were manning phones, reviewing files, tracking Harrington's movements. Maps of the city and surrounding areas were pinned to the walls, with markers indicating the location of Harrington's last known sighting. The tip line was ringing constantly, and officers were fielding calls from citizens who claimed to have seen the white van. Detective Sarah Kim approached Marcus as soon as he entered the command center. Detective, we've made progress on identifying some of the children in the photographs. We've cross-referenced them with missing children reports from the past 15 years, and we've identified at least 17 children whose disappearances correlate with cases handled by Captain Harrington. Of those 17, only 3 have been found alive. The other 14... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. The other 14 were almost certainly dead. Marcus felt a wave of nausea wash over him. 14 children, 14 lives cut short. 14 families destroyed by grief and loss. And all of it had happened under the watch of a captain in the police department, a man who was supposed to be protecting children, not hunting them. What about the 3 who were found alive? Marcus asked, his voice tight. They were found in remote locations, and they had no memory of how they got there. They were severely traumatized, and they all suffered from significant gaps in their memory. We've been trying to interview them, but they're not very helpful. It's as if their minds have blocked out the trauma. Where are they now? 2 of them are in psychiatric care at County Hospital. The 3rd one is in the custody of Child Protective Services. We can arrange interviews, but I'm not sure how much they'll be able to tell us. Marcus nodded. Do it. Interview them. Show them photographs of Harrington. See if they can confirm that he was their abductor. And get me everything you can on those 17 cases. The original investigations, the evidence collected, the conclusions that were reached. I want to understand how Harrington was able to cover this up for so long. Marcus turned to the wall where the maps were displayed, studying the route that Harrington's vehicle had taken. The white van had been spotted heading north on Highway 7, moving away from the city, heading toward the mountains and the remote areas beyond the city limits. It was a logical escape route. Isolated, with fewer people, fewer cameras, fewer witnesses. But it was also a route that would eventually lead to dead ends, to mountain passes where the van would be trapped. Where's he going? Marcus muttered to himself, studying the map. Where would he take a child? And then something clicked in his mind. A memory surfaced from years ago, a case he had worked on early in his career. A missing child case from 15 years ago. A girl named Emily Chen, who had disappeared from a park near the city. The case had been assigned to Captain Harrington, and it had been closed after a few weeks with the conclusion that Emily had run away. But Emily had never been found, and her parents had never accepted the conclusion that their daughter had simply disappeared. Marcus rushed to the filing cabinets where the cold case files were stored. He began searching through them frantically, pulling out files, scanning them, looking for the Emily Chen case. And when he found it, he saw something that he had missed 15 years ago. A reference to a cabin in the mountains, a property that had been owned by Harrington's family. The reference was buried in an evidence log, a note about a location that had been searched and cleared. But what if it hadn't been cleared? What if Harrington had used that cabin to hide evidence, to hide children? Get me the address of that cabin, Marcus commanded, showing the file to Detective Kim. And get me a team ready to move out immediately. If I'm right, that's where Harrington is taking Mia. Within minutes, Marcus had the address. A remote cabin located in the mountains, approximately 40 miles north of the city, accessible only by a narrow mountain road. The cabin was owned by a trust that Harrington had set up years ago, a trust that had never been thoroughly investigated because no one had thought to look at it. All units converge on the following location, Marcus transmitted, giving the address of the cabin. Captain Robert Harrington is believed to be heading to this location with the missing child, Mia Torres. This is an extremely dangerous situation. Do not approach the cabin without backup. Wait for Detective Webb to arrive before engaging. I repeat, wait for Detective Webb before engaging. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Officer Chen was waiting for him, and together they rushed to Marcus's car. The drive to the cabin would take approximately 45 minutes, depending on traffic and road conditions. 45 minutes during which Harrington could be doing anything to Mia, during which the child could be suffering, during which a monster could be continuing his reign of terror. As Marcus drove through the night, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes focused on the road ahead, His mind was working through the psychology of the case. Harrington had been committing these crimes for years, had been covering them up, had been living a double life as both a respected officer and a predator. But something had changed. Something had caused him to take Mia, to send that email, to expose himself. What was it? And then Marcus understood. Harrington hadn't taken Mia to continue his crimes. He had taken Mia to end them. He had taken Mia because he wanted to be caught, because he wanted to confess, because the weight of his crimes had finally become too much to bear. The email wasn't a taunt. It was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to bring his crimes into the light, to force someone to face the truth that he had been hiding for so long. Harrington was suicidal. And if Marcus didn't reach him in time, if Marcus didn't convince him to surrender, then Mia would die along with him, another victim claimed by a predator's final act of violence. Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator, the car speeding through the night, racing against time, racing against darkness, racing against the inevitable conclusion that seemed to be approaching with inexorable certainty. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, hiding secrets in their shadows, hiding a cabin where a child's fate hung in the balance, where a monster was waiting, where the truth was about to be revealed in blood and tears and the final reckoning of a man who had lived a lie for too long. The mountain road twisted and turned like a serpent, climbing higher and higher into the darkness, leaving the city far behind. Marcus drove with intense focus, his headlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the mountains, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere where the world seemed to exist in shades of gray and black. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass, with a sheer drop-off on one side that disappeared into an abyss of darkness. One wrong move, one moment of inattention, and the car would plunge off the cliff, tumbling through the void to crash on the rocks below. But Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't slow down. Every second mattered. Every moment that passed was a moment closer to tragedy or triumph. And he refused to accept that tragedy was inevitable. Officer Chen sat in the passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating with the teams that were converging on the cabin from different directions. State police units were moving up from the south. County sheriff's deputies were approaching from the east. A tactical team from the police department was being mobilized to provide backup and support. The cabin was being surrounded, boxed in, a trap that Harrington wouldn't be able to escape from, assuming he was indeed there. Assuming he hadn't taken a different route, assuming that Marcus's deduction was correct. Teams are in position, Officer Chen reported, hanging up his phone. They're maintaining a perimeter around the cabin, but they're holding back as you requested. No one will move in until you give the order. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the road. Good. We need to approach this carefully. If Harrington feels cornered, if he feels like there's no way out, he might decide to take Mia with him. We need to give him a reason to surrender, a reason to believe that there's a way out of this that doesn't end in death. Do you really think he'll surrender? Officer Chen asked, his voice uncertain. A man who's been committing these crimes for years, who's been covering them up, who's been living a double life. That kind of person doesn't usually go quietly. No, Marcus agreed. But I think Harrington is different. I think he's been carrying the weight of his crimes for so long that it's become unbearable. I think he's reached a breaking point. And that's why he took Mia and sent that email. He wants to be caught. He wants to confess. He wants to end this nightmare. Our job is to give him a way to do that without taking Mia with him. The road continued to climb, winding through dense forest where the trees seemed to close in on both sides, creating a tunnel of darkness. The fog grew thicker, more oppressive, and Marcus had to slow down slightly to maintain visibility. The GPS on the dashboard indicated that they were getting close to the cabin. Only about 5 miles away now. Only about 10 minutes of driving time remaining. Marcus's mind was working through the scenario, trying to anticipate what they would find when they reached the cabin. Would Harrington be waiting for them? Would he have Mia with him? Would the child be alive? Or would they be arriving too late to save her? The questions gnawed at him, creating a tension in his chest that made it difficult to breathe. His radio crackled to life. It was Detective Kim from the command center. "Detective Webb, we've got an update on those interviews with the survivors. The first victim, a girl named Lisa Martinez, was able to identify Captain Harrington from a photograph. She confirmed that he was the man who abducted her 8 years ago. She was able to provide some details about where she was held, and it matches the description of the cabin you're heading to. Additionally, we've found something in Harrington's personal files that you need to know about." "What is it?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. "There are journals, Detective. Handwritten journals where Harrington has documented his crimes. He's written about each child he's taken, describing what he did to them, how he felt, his justifications for his actions. It's deeply disturbing. But there's something else. In his most recent entries, dated from the past few weeks, Harrington has been writing about wanting to end it all, about wanting to confess, about wanting to bring everything into the light. His final entry, dated today, says, 'Today, I will take one last child, and I will use her to force the truth out. Today it all ends. Today I finally stop running.'" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Harrington was planning to end his life. He was planning to use Mia as a catalyst to force a confrontation with law enforcement. And then he was planning to take his own life, possibly taking Mia with him. This was a suicide by cop situation, a desperate act by a desperate man who wanted to end his existence, but didn't have the courage to do it alone. "Keep monitoring those journals," Marcus said, "and get me a psychological profile on Harrington. I need to understand his mental state, his triggers, what might convince him to surrender peacefully." The cabin appeared suddenly through the fog, materializing like a ghost from the darkness. It was a large structure, built from logs and stone, with a steeply pitched roof designed to shed snow. Smoke was rising from the chimney, curling up into the cold night air. A white van was parked in front of the cabin, its doors closed, its windows dark. The scene was eerily quiet, almost peaceful, as if nothing terrible was happening inside those walls, as if a child wasn't being held captive by a predator, as if a man wasn't planning to end his life in a final act of violence. Marcus pulled his car to a stop approximately 100 yards from the cabin, far enough away to be safe, but close enough to see the structure clearly. He could see the tactical teams positioned in the trees around the cabin, their weapons ready, their eyes focused on the building. Snipers were positioned on the surrounding hills, their rifles trained on the cabin's windows and doors. This was a full-scale tactical operation, the kind of response that was reserved for the most dangerous situations. Marcus picked up his radio. "All units, hold position. No one moves, no one fires. No one does anything without my explicit authorization. We're going to try to resolve this peacefully. I'm going to approach the cabin and attempt to make contact with Captain Harrington." "Detective, that's extremely dangerous," Officer Chen said, his hand reaching out to grab Marcus's arm. "Let the tactical team handle this. Let them go in and secure the child." "No," Marcus said firmly. "If the tactical team goes in, Harrington will panic. He'll see it as an assault and he'll respond with violence. The only way to save Mia is to talk to Harrington, to convince him to surrender, to give him a reason to believe that there's a way out of this that doesn't end in tragedy. Marcus opened the car door and stepped out into the cold night air. The fog swirled around him, dampening his clothes, chilling him to the bone. He left his weapon in the car, wanting to appear non-threatening, wanting to show Harrington that he was willing to take a risk, that he was willing to trust that the man inside the cabin still had some shred of humanity left, some part of him that didn't want to hurt anyone else. He walked slowly toward the cabin, his hands visible, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The fog seemed to get thicker as he approached, as if the mountain itself was trying to obscure what was happening, trying to hide the terrible truth that was about to be revealed. When Marcus reached the door of the cabin, he stopped and called out, his voice steady and calm. "Captain Harrington, this is Detective Marcus Webb. I'm here alone. I want to talk to you. I want to help you." For a long moment, there was no response. The cabin remained silent, the only sound the wind moving through the trees and the distant calls of night birds. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest, could feel the tension radiating from the tactical teams positioned around the cabin, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. And then, slowly, the cabin door opened. Captain Robert Harrington stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light coming from inside the cabin. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life in law enforcement. But his face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his expression one of profound despair and resignation. In his right hand, he held a pistol, and the barrel was pressed against the head of a small blonde girl, Mia Torres. Mia's face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror, her entire body trembling with fear. She was wearing the same pink butterfly t-shirt that she had been wearing when she was abducted, but it was now torn and dirty. Her blonde pigtails were disheveled, and there were marks on her wrists where she had been restrained. She looked at Marcus with a desperate plea in her eyes, silently begging for help, silently hoping that this man who had come to the cabin in the darkness would save her from the monster who was holding her. "Detective Webb," Harrington said, his voice hoarse and strained, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "I'm glad you came. I was hoping you would be the one to respond. You were always a good detective, always thorough, always willing to dig deeper than most officers. I knew that if I gave you the right clues, if I pointed you in the right direction, you would eventually figure it out." "I did figure it out, Captain," Marcus said, taking a slow step forward. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the children. I know about the cover-up. But it's not too late. You can still make this right. You can still save Mia. You can still end this without anyone else getting hurt." "End it?" Harrington laughed, a sound that was devoid of humor, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of despair. "Detective, it ended a long time ago. It ended the moment I took that first child, the moment I crossed that line from being a protector to being a predator. Everything since then has been a lie, a performance, a desperate attempt to hide the monster that I've become." "You're right," Marcus said, continuing to move slowly forward. "You did become a monster. But monsters can change. You can change. You can put down that gun. You can release Mia. And you can face justice for what you've done. You can confess. You can spend the rest of your life in prison, but at least you'll be alive. At least you'll have the opportunity to atone for your crimes, to find some measure of redemption." "Redemption?" Harrington's voice cracked with emotion. "There is no redemption for what I've done. There is no atonement that could possibly balance the scales for the lives I've destroyed, the families I've devastated, the children I've murdered. The only redemption I can find is in ending this, in stopping the cycle, in ensuring that I can never hurt anyone else again. Marcus could see Harrington's finger tightening on the trigger. He could see the desperation in the man's eyes, the finality of his decision. Harrington had made up his mind. He was going to end this, and he was going to take Mia with him. Marcus had only seconds to act, only a moment to prevent tragedy. "Wait!" Marcus shouted, raising his hands. "Before you do this, before you end it, I want you to know that I understand. I understand why you did what you did. I understand the psychological break that occurred, the moment when you stopped being able to control your impulses. I understand that you've been suffering, that you've been carrying this burden alone for years. But taking Mia won't end your suffering. It will only create more suffering, more pain, more tragedy." Harrington's hand was shaking, the barrel of the gun wavering slightly. "You don't understand anything, Detective. You can't understand what it's like to be me, to carry these thoughts, these urges, to fight them every single day and lose the battle again and again and again." "You're right," Marcus said. "I don't understand, but I know someone who does. I know a psychiatrist, a man who has spent his entire career working with people like you, people who have committed terrible crimes, but who still have some part of them that wants to change, that wants to be better. If you release Mia, if you put down that gun, I promise you that you'll have access to the best mental health care available. I promise you that your story will be told, that the world will understand the psychological factors that led to your crimes. I promise you that you won't be forgotten, that your case will be studied, that your life, for all its darkness, will serve some purpose in helping us understand how to prevent other people from becoming like you." For a moment, Marcus thought he had gotten through to Harrington. The man's grip on the gun loosened slightly. His eyes, which had been filled with despair, seemed to flicker with something that might have been hope, might have been the faintest possibility of redemption. But then something changed. Harrington's expression hardened. His jaw clenched. His grip on the gun tightened again. "No," he said, his voice hollow and final. "I'm done talking. I'm done running. I'm done pretending that there's any possibility of redemption for someone like me. This ends now." And in that moment, as Harrington's finger began to squeeze the trigger, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He dove forward, covering the distance between himself and Harrington in a desperate lunge, his body moving on pure instinct, driven by the primal need to save the child, to prevent tragedy, to stop the inevitable conclusion that seemed to be approaching with inexorable certainty. The gunshot echoed through the mountains, a sound that seemed to shatter the night itself, a sound that seemed to tear apart the fabric of reality. And in the chaos that followed, in the confusion and the darkness and the terrible uncertainty of what had just happened, Marcus found himself on the ground, his body covered in blood, his vision blurring, his consciousness beginning to fade. And the last thing he saw, before the darkness claimed him completely, was Mia's face, her eyes wide with shock and confusion, her mouth open as if to scream, and he wondered if he had succeeded in saving her, or if he had failed, if he had given his life only to watch the child he was trying to save slip away into the darkness anyway.